And we're back and we're moving into the final portion of our show. We are most excited to talk about some of the latest research coming out of the University of Belize, even before they present it to the rest of the public. So that makes us even happier. So the Belize National Research Conference starts tomorrow, and it's going to be held in Belmopan, and they're going to be presenting new research from their faculty. And so we have a number of representatives here to tell us some of the information about their research. We have with us Dr. Christopher DeShield, who is the Assistant Professor for Faculty of Education and Arts. On the end, we have Gerardo Polanco, who is a lecturer at Sacred Heart College. We have Ivory Kelly, who is a lecturer at the University of Belize in the Faculty of Education and Arts. And we have Dr. Priscilla Lopez, who is the Assistant Professor in the Faculty of Education and Arts at UB. And Osvaldo Cantun, who is a student at UB. Good morning and welcome.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for being here.
No, if I could start off by repeating something I said, which is that I'm very proud and happy that you guys are here, because I'm a UWE student, and at UWE there's a lot of research going on, and a lot of the lecturers who actually wrote the books were the people teaching. And so this is a major step forward. I know that you've told me that there's other research going on, and there's a multitude of research. So even from that standpoint, it's a good jettison point to let Belizeans know that our national universities and our educational institutions are producing knowledge that's specific to Belize and relevant to Belize. Now, my first question is, what inspired the individual research pieces that you've done? Because there are three, as I understand.
Here we have three represented.
What inspired each one, and maybe give us a very deep, a brief description of what your research abstract is.
Sure. Should I start?
Yeah.
For our paper, so I am engaged in a collaborative project for this conference with Mr. Polanco from Sacred Heart. And I met Mr. Polanco at a conference earlier last year that our department actually hosted, called the Caribbean Studies Forum. And so that event occasioned several papers, some wonderful papers. I think Mr. Polanco's among them. And so I got to hear some of the research that he had done at UWE, I think, incidentally, right? You're a graduate from UWE, from his thesis there. And I was presenting a paper at the conference, and it just so happened that some of the research that he was doing there meshed with my own interests. I think we're both in literary studies and eco-criticism. And so it was nice to see a kind of kindred spirit in terms of academia.
Somebody who talks to
you. A narrow discipline. You don't often see those kinds of things and connections. So it's at that conference that I've learned about his research and his work. And when this conference from NICH, this Research for National Development conference came about, and they have a call for papers, this allowed us to pursue another research project. And on this occasion, I asked him if he would be interested in collaborating, because his paper contributed a large part to the background for my own approach to a specific text. So I was looking at a work of Belizean literature, Ziedjo's Festival of San Joaquin. And so I was interested to see how we could collaborate to delve into that text a little bit more.
And what is the premise of the research?
Well, we were looking at...
the thesis statement is what you call it?
We were looking at folklore, the folkloric element in this book. The book has been written on in the critical literature, in the published literature, although there isn't too much attention given to it.
It's like the middle child.
So we wanted to make a contribution to that literature, and through this conference, this becomes an avenue to get some feedback from other intelligent people and other people interested in similar subjects, so that we can use that criticism to develop the argument and eventually publish in an outlet abroad in a journal.
When you say delve into the book, what are you talking about? What are you essentially looking for?
Well, for this paper in particular, I noted that although there were some approaches to the work that were published, none of them really engaged with the aspect of folklore, especially Belizean folklore. In particular, we're looking at her use of the Ishtabai in Belizean folklore and its cognates, La Sucia, La Llorona, those kind of things, which I thought was strange since it seemed to be a central part of the text. Subtle, complex, but it's still a significant part.
Yeah.
So that would be our contribution.
What happened was that when we look at folklore in Belize, we're usually getting stories that we get from our grandparents, and so they're passed on,
oral history.
and they don't differ much. But when they're presented in stuff like literature, it is the artist's job to use those as a sort of lens to see ourselves, or as a mirror. For example, if we see like La Llorona, this is a woman who killed her children because of an abusive man. And these stories existed in a time where we had very little understanding of postpartum depression. And so because of that, then this woman who is suffering from a very real mental illness is demonized. And because of that, and these have very real world applications in Belize, especially with women who are fighting against everything that is set up against them in society. They have become demonized. So as an artist, it is their responsibility to safeguard the cultures that we're doing, but the culture must also safeguard marginalized people in an already marginalized population. So that is how we're seeing these folklores, that they can tell us more about who we are and where our ethical reasoning comes from.
You have taken a very cheeky approach to this book, though. Basically, as I understand it, from the abstract, you're saying, listen, Belizeans, you take this thing like story tales, but it is far more important than that, and you guys overlook, you guys like Bekalam, and you guys are championing Bekalam, but this is where the money is at, this is where the bacon is at.
Yeah.
When you deconstruct the book in such a way, are you concerned of any sort of misunderstanding of what you're trying to push in dissecting it? Because taking it more than just, it's like taking Animal Farm and saying, this is not just about some pigs, you know, guys. This is really about some amazing stuff going on here. Yeah. And getting Belizeans to love the depth, the intellectual depth coming out of this book must be a challenge. How do you bridge that gap?
Well, I know there's some people, it's maybe phrased kind of negatively, but there's some people who believe that every act of interpretation is a misreading, right? So you can't read it absolutely, but you have strong misreadings, right? Better than weaker ones. So you attempt the strongest misreading of the text, right? Which I kind of like. I like that rubric. There's always more to learn when you're reading a text, and you're just trying to get the strongest misreading, right, of that work, right? Yeah.
All right, let's move on to Ms. Kelly.
Yes, so they mentioned the role of the artist, and it just so happens that I am one of the artists. And my main project and that I'm going to be presenting on at the conference is a creative writing project. I have translated into Creole using the standardized Belize Kriol spelling system, a short story that I originally wrote in English. And so my main objectives include making the case that given the fact that we've had the Creole dictionary since 2007, it is high time that we produce a far more robust body of Creole literature than we have today, right? And also to also make the case that in order for that to happen, to return to the arguments put forward by our esteemed linguists as far back as maybe 1995 or 1973 when Colville Young wrote his dissertation, the argument for the elevation of Creole to an official status. With Creole being an official language, we will be teaching it in school. It will be policy driven, and it will be alongside English, one of the languages that we teach in school. And then we all will be able to read and write Creole as competently as we do English. I think it is very unfortunate that my reading level in Creole is my first language. My reading level in Creole, I would assess it at maybe around a standard 1, Standard 2 reading and writing level, and that is unacceptable. And so at the University of Belize, we have begun to have these kinds of conversation in our literature courses to incorporate more Belizean literature in academia, and including now Creole literature. Right? And so I want to show, by using the translation project that I have undertaken, that this is possible, that it is necessary, and it's high time that we do it.
Can I ask this question? Which is, sorry.
Go ahead.
There's a disconnect for me in terms of, and I'm asking you to kind of address it for me. Wipe it out my head quickly.
If I can.
There's this perception that Creole is a spoken language. It's not. It doesn't have its origin in a written form. So to say that your proficiency in reading and writing it is at a standard 1 level, it's probably because that's the level of the highest graduation of where it is.
Yes.
Is it that we're trying to move Creole past what its natural weight is into an area that it's probably unnatural to?
At this point, it is still, by and large, an oral language. But with the availability of the lexicon, we now have the tools to elevate it to the status of English, where we can read it, we can write it, we know what the rules are. There's an increasing number of publications on the grammar of the Creole language. There's a publication by Ken Decker that outlines the Creole grammar, and then the dictionary tells you what's the standardized spelling. And so we have the tools available now, and so, you know, we can and should produce more written forms of the language.
I like to talk to scientists.
It's fascinating because I've always questioned, I recall, you know, especially when I first came to Channel 5, that the Belize Kriol dictionary was a standard in the newsroom, because there is a standard in terms of spelling for Creole. And how you translate English into Creole or vice versa. But there seems to be a lack of uptake to take it seriously. For some reason, people feel that maybe because it is oral, I can spell it the way I choose. And even there's a differentiation between what someone in the north city or south may use interchangeably. I always use the reference that, you know, someone is from the south when they say she versus e, which we use here. How do you fit that into the conversation in talking about formalizing the language?
Very good, very important question. We're talking about perhaps regional variations, and it is true that the Creole has a different set or some unique features. The way it's spoken in Toledo, for example, or Punta Gorda, say, versus Belize City, versus, I was even told by one of my colleagues yesterday that people in Roaring Creek speak Creole in a very distinctive way, different from how you would hear Creole in Belmopan. So there are regional variations, and that's one of the research questions that I am proposing in my presentation on Thursday, to invite our linguists and other scholars to do the research in order to help us determine what are the different regional variations of Creole. And which ones then, one of my main concerns in this project is to determine which variety is most suitable or lends itself most readily to literary publications, contemporary literary publications. Because we cannot write a contemporary literary work of fiction, for example, the way we would write a folk tale, right? Different genre, different purpose. And so which of the varieties lends itself most readily?
All right, I have more questions for both of you, but I want to hear about the third. This is why you need to go to the research conference or find out how you can participate. So the final piece that we're just briefly scratching the surface on is a very critical issue in this country, and that's talking about mathematics and how we learn or don't learn. Please tell us more.
I ordinarily research in mathematics. It's my major area. And I also teach a research course at the University of Belize, and Mr. Cantun was one of my students, and he was pursuing a research on math anxiety and math efficacy, and he was examining And if persons believe that they cannot solve math problems, will that impact their performance? And if they're very anxious, they're panicky, when there's a test, perhaps they're trembling, they're not focusing, how does that impact performance? And so given my background in math ed, I guess my dissertation is on the use of constructivist-based instruction to teach math problems.
Can you say it in English?
Pardon?
Constructivist.
Use of constructivist-based instruction.
Layman terms.
It's like having, it's having students engage in learning activities to reflect on word problems with their peers and speak about what it is about. Can they actually do that?
Sounds much better in a fancy way, you put it, you know.
And so I've also been trending the results of the PSC in mathematics and at the secondary level. And I'm very concerned that the scores don't seem to improve any. And so when Osvaldo began researching about efficacy and beliefs and anxiety, I found that to be very exciting. And so we've both begun to look at his data, and we're about to publish in a journal our findings. But I want Osvaldo to share, but we must say that we've noted that many of our students are very anxious. They get very almost scared of mathematics, and they believe that they cannot perform well. And if you're doing something and you feel, I can't do this well, and I don't feel like I can perform well doing this, it really impacts how they feel about the subject.
Wow.
And so it's a really huge area that we're exploring, looking at the students and how they feel about the subject itself.
Yeah, well, I would like to say that it is more common than we think. Math anxiety is very common. I mean, all the time when I get into groups and I talk to my colleagues, the first thing they say that, oh, you're going to talk about mathematics, just not get into that, right? and
Especially to this group over here, you got a brain battle happening.
So, and the thing is that since I am planning to be a teacher, I always see mathematics in different ways. I try to see mathematics in different activities. How can we make mathematics more engaging? So that's a very interesting thing, because I was looking at the PhD results, and indeed, out of a trend of 10 years, they have not have no increase whatsoever, just like a 0.2, 0.1, 50, stays on the 50s. So it's really a concern. So I must admit that there must be like many factors influencing that, but then math anxiety is clearly one. And we look at, for example, we put in Google, we put any kind of anxiety, like science anxiety, and then you will not necessarily see that much information there. So if you put math anxiety now, a vast amount of information. I mean, as a country, we need to delve it a little bit more in that, because many research have been carried out in other countries relating to math anxiety. It's a serious issue.
How did you make the connection between math and, which you've just probably explained to half of Belize what problem they have in a scientific way, but how did you make the connection between math and anxiety, and not between math and anything else? Why math anxiety?
Well, I think it touches in the sense that the personal experience, right? The thing is that I noticed that I get into the class, right? I'm good at mathematics. I consider myself good at mathematics. And but when I get into the class and the teacher is just giving the test and they're always telling you, oh, you have 15 more minutes to go. So this thing rushes into my mind, you know, the adrenaline kind of thing. And then I just freeze and I forget what to put in the answer. And then I get out of the test and I realize, oh my goodness, that's an easy problem for me, right? So I started delving and studying into this kind of things, and I realized and I found out that many research, especially for example that of Ashraf, and he was one of the researchers that was actually taking this very seriously. And then he realized that our working memory stops when we have math anxiety. And there was an investigation.
I'm just trying to wonder, you know, are you talking about people with generalized anxiety who experience it during math, or people who only have anxiety for math?
It is, and that's a good question, because we were trying to find if there is a distinction between anxiety and math anxiety, and many research are putting into the table that actually math anxiety is totally different than anxiety.
So you may get it only specifically under the pressure of executing something
numerical.
Numeric.
Relating to mathematics. And I was surprised that some people are actually like get this anxiety feeling just in seeing the book. And then, no, for real.
Yeah.
I
And
was,
you dismiss it. I mean, I'm guilty. I say it all the time on the show. You know, somebody tries to pressure me with mental math, and I'm like, I can't. Just don't. You know. But you triggered a thought in my head, and if you'd allow me, we spoke to a neurosurgeon last week. It was about the science of happy, something completely unrelated. But he was talking about how our brains function differently as individuals. And so he used one specific example, and it related to a math test for his son, where his son essentially failed a test because he did not, as we know in classroom, put the work. He never showed the work. But that his son's brain doesn't work that way. His son's brain didn't work in that particular pattern where you have to put out the full sequence to get to the answer. And I'm thinking of that, and it was triggered by you saying, for 10 years, we've had the same results for maths, which is below average and definitely a critical area. But we're still teaching the same way.
exactly. So those things are worth considering. I mean, why are we it's the thing, and the first thing to look at probably when we see this kind of problems is the teachers, right? And which is not necessarily just the teachers, because I believe it's a community. Because I get into the class now, we have a very difficult task, I believe, as new teachers, because we get into the classroom, we come up with these activities, we get to learn from the instructors. Now they're coming with new ideas, and we want to implement these new ideas. We want to bring about activities and make mathematics, because you see, mathematics is just typically the board teacher getting into and writing formulas and us just writing the answers, and it is just not that engaging. So we get with these new activities, we get into the classroom, we wanna implement these activities, but guess what? The students are not responding to it, and we are not responding positively to it because it has been I think we have developed a culture around the fear about mathematics, and it has started from elementary
That's what I was gonna ask.
so we bring about this activity. I was going this last week I was doing a lesson, and then I was trying to do these activities with triangles and engaging students with how to build triangles using strings and all that. But the students, I said, you know what, we're gonna do a game today. We're gonna engage in a game in order for you to learn the concept. And the first thing they said, sir, is the game gonna be related to mathematics? And I said, of course the game is gonna be mathematics.
Then we don't want to play.
Exactly, that's exactly what they thought. Then we don't want to play, and they shut themselves up and they don't give the opportunity.
Is there a lie that we have been telling students and the public in relation to mathematics? And is that coming to haunt us in this anxiety? For example, at the primary school level, we say that multiplication 3 times 2 is 6. And it's a shortcut, that it becomes a memorization process as opposed to a representation process. I say this, and if you'll allow me just to jump in here, I had a math teacher at SJC, one of the best math teachers, I say bar none, Fajr Bahar. And before we did CXC mathematics, we had a very long syllabus, as you remember, at CXC. And for the first semester at SJC, he taught us none of the syllabus. He simply taught us puzzles as to how to solve different arcs and different angles. But by the time he got into the actual teaching of math, we just took off. My question is specific to the culture that we have, which is math, unlike any other subject, doesn't give you shortcuts. In English, I'll pit you guys against each other. You can read any sentence, you can misinterpret it as you were saying earlier, but you have an introduction to it. You know what a is, you know what the is, and you know what it's definitive. In mathematics, if you don't know what those shrivelly things mean and how they relate to each other, there's no shortcuts. So my question to you, isn't there a natural anxiety because of the weight and relevance of what mathematics is? We can even tell what light is on mathematics, what life is on mathematics. So are we underplaying the importance of mathematics, and shouldn't there be a natural anxiety to it because of that weight?
Well, I think that anxiety to a certain extent is very helpful, right?
Yes.
And we have it naturally. I was reading about the and how it helps us.
Yeah, why you get anxious and nervous.
And the thing is that it helps us in our brain to develop, because it develops the connections in our brain, and it helps us to understand. But to a certain extent, I mean, the anxiety levels, we are able to read it based on the forms that we. When it reaches a certain level, then our working memory just stops. So it's worth questioning. What are we doing? Are we actually, as teachers, as parents, making this thing about mathematics a big deal? Are we actually, why are we saying that, for example, in our parents, we're not giving the opportunity to students to learn mathematics in different ways? We are just saying you have to learn mathematics because it's going to help you eventually. And then what do we know about mathematics? That it's just paper, pencil thing. We say that are we going to use algebra in your real life? Have you heard that question? I don't think that that's a very interesting, very good question to say, especially because there are many things that we can do in mathematics. Probably because we are not getting used to the activities that we can do. We don't relate it to the real life situation, but in real life, we're always finding the x. Yeah. Right? Finding the x values for this. No, but that's the first thing.
Yeah.
So,
what age did you do the research?
Age range of students? That was junior college students.
Okay, okay. Because it'd be interesting to see how early this math anxiety develops, because sometimes it can be created at a very early age.
My question is, how did we get here? And actually, when you look at some of the ways how math is taught in schools, it's almost as if though the teachers sometimes would say this is somewhat challenging, and it's as if though there's an additional level of pressure and stress when that subject is being taught. And so I think the way the teacher presents it, there's need to have the students realize this is not as challenging as it seems, and make it fun and exciting. I think that would be helpful. But
what about subject teaching from a very young age? Because if you love math. If you're teaching a preschooler or infant one, I should say, mathematics, you'll approach it differently than someone who has to cover all the subjects and will like one more than the other. And isn't math foundational? Like, you have to understand one concept to move forward.
And there also needs to be an injection of the love for the subject. So if you're teaching it because you're intrinsically motivated to teach it, it's your thing. You're gonna, inject the students with that passion for the learning. So.
Okay, so math got me tied up for a second, but I did have a question to come back for both of your research. One is Ms. Kelly, looking at the Creole language. One of the biggest criticisms that we hear, and I know that you're also an English teacher, so you'll understand it even more so, that we as Belizeans struggle to use proper English, whether writing or speaking. And all the time, it is attributed to the fact that we speak Creole. So how does an English teacher see the importance of a formalization of Creole as a help or a hindrance to our English skills?
Very good. One of the changes that I think we need to make in our education system in Belize, as far as how we approach the teaching of language, of the English language specifically, is to accept the fact that virtually all of us are acquiring English as a second language. I know that when I was in school, in our generation, perhaps Chris and I, we were taught, by and large, I think we were taught English, we were taught language arts as second language learner. They broke down the components, they taught you the sound system, the phonetic system, the spelling and all of that, and then you found ways to integrate it. Approaching the teaching of English as a second language acknowledges our reality.
Okay.
So very excellent and useful research has gone into the use of Creole knowledge and knowledge of the Creole grammatical structures in the classroom to aid the teaching of English. And I'm speaking, for example, of the dissertation study done by Slovana Odds in 2012, I believe, in which she carried out this project where she used Creole and helped the teachers to acquire familiarity with Creole and to look at how it contrasts with English and use that knowledge, that contrastive analysis between Creole and English to teach children English. Because if you understand why Belizean English speakers make certain mistakes, right?
Yeah.
And how that's connected to our use of Creole, then you are able to scaffold the students' learning of English. And so then to value Creole more and use it more in the classroom rather than eschew it altogether, I think it's coming against, I think it's high time that we embrace it more and see how it can be used as a tool for the teaching. And Dr. Ud's study revealed that there is, in her words, dramatic results, dramatic improvement in the students' English grades when that approach was taken.
So what we're saying is that children enter school and there's an assumption that they know English, but they have to be taught English as a second language.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But it seems to me that, and let me ask it in a formal question. What is the impact of, what do you hope to be the impact of your study, or what you're provoking thought to? Is it that we use Creole as a tool for the future, or is it that we use it as a tool to bolster our learning of English?
That is one, but also because Creole is our lingua franca.
Yeah.
In Belize, it is one of the cultural elements that unify us. It is how most of us talk, so it's an important aspect of our identity. If we can embrace Creole and see it for what it is, right? Beautiful, uniquely Belizean. Embrace that and use it in academia, use it in the most lofty places. We give it the kind of prestige that English has. We read in it, we write in it, we use it in all of these settings. We feel better about ourselves.
Let me be facey.
Yes.
What if somebody were to argue, somebody who's definitely not Belizean, argued that Creole is a thing of the past, not of the future? That mathematically, even the number of persons who use it, our population is a very small percent of our population actually speak English, particularly outside the districts. If you look at, commerce, the future of Belize in terms of commerce, if you look at everything other than the fact of what its historical relevance is, it has no life beyond.
I have to disagree with you on that.
No, that's not me. No, that means
with that person on that. And while we do not use Creole in formal writing situations as much as I hope we will very soon, we do use it in every single sphere. In the House of Representatives, our parliamentarians use it all the time and very effectively, right? and we Belizeans don't have any difficulty with that. We embrace it. So yes, in Belize, our Creole might be unique to us, and it's only about 350,000 of us who probably know the language, and if it becomes a written language, but you know what, we few 350,000 people are significant.
Yes.
Who cares what everybody else? Who cares what everybody else?
But I have to tell you what I've seen
thinks
as
or wants or
well. Spanish
needs.
speakers come into the country and their first language is Creole.
They do try.
They don't speak English, they speak Creole.
Eventually.
I don't want to lose the opportunity to get in a question here, because talking about folklore is something that, we really need to do more often. And you mentioned La Llorona and how it's been formalized in CHL's book. Now, a lot of times, and this is why I love conversations like that, this is why I love reading research or any new study that comes out, because it just challenges our way of thinking, whether we like it or not, and sometimes agree with it or not. But when you start talking about a cultural folklore especially, it gets really touchy. It's almost like, don't go there because that's what my grandmother told me and that's what her grandmother told me, and there's a reason, because it's going to, if it's keep men from stopping to consume too much alcohol, or whatever other purpose, or children that they don't wonder about because Tata Duende will get them. How comfortable are you in putting forward a view that may possibly go against somebody's cultural beliefs and being able to respond to their concerns in that manner?
Well, I mean, it's a legacy that the writers are working with, right? And I think all the writers, contemporary writers, are confronted with exactly this tradition, this legacy, and they can bravely chart new ground, work with it. In Ziegel's case, I think she's offering a recuperation of some of the figures there, especially of the Ishtabai. So that's there. There's also a history behind some of these figures that sometimes goes unknown by the people using the words, the names, and the language. And I think my colleague did a good job of charting some of the history behind some of these figures that we use, sometimes unknowingly, where it comes from.
There's a history?
Yes.
Where does Tata Duende come from?
Well,
You could say
most of these stories come from indigenous knowledge systems. For example, the Tata Duende, my grandmother told me stories of the Nukushtat, which is the same thing as the Tata Duende, only because it has the original Yucatec Maya name. However, the Nukushtat is a guardian of the forest. Of course, they have this sense of dualism. They're both good and evil. But as all colonized spaces, all native knowledge systems have become synchronized with Christianity. And because the Nukushtat didn't fit into the spectrum of the Catholicism or Christianity, then it has become demonized, and it is no longer a guardian spirit, but a trickster and someone who abducts children. And so all of these folklores, they're encoded with this colonial belief system that in order for us to find out who we truly are, we need to peel back those layers. And in so doing, we get a lot of lessons as to how our society tells us how to think and what is morally right and what is morally wrong.
Can I ask Shubin two questions quickly? Which is one, in doing your analysis, the backdrop is Ziegel's book, but were you ever tempted to get in contact with her and have some interaction with her as to what you meant when you did this? Is my perspective or interpretation of what you're trying to do here, right?
Validate your point.
And the second thing is, I hear you guys speaking past the book and past these issues into broader topics. What do you envision and hope to be the impact of your research on the landscape of writers or just?
Yeah, those are great questions. Well, I think Ziegel herself, to address the second of the questions, I believe she envisions a social function to her work as well. All of the novels seem to narrate Belizean experience, and they seem instructional in some cases. There's a lot to learn from there, and it seems like she herself would have a vision and a hope to influence society, Belizean society, in progressive ways. So I hope that our own research here would mirror that same function in calling to attention some of the things that Ziegel has in the work itself, right? So it's complementary in that we're calling attention to things that sometimes get overlooked.
Yeah, and you're clearly saying that this is a missed gem in our arsenal.
Yeah, in the critical
Okay,
literature.
we're running the risk now of turning this into a research conference, and we are so out of time. But this is fascinating information, and I don't want to miss the point, which we didn't ask, but I'll just go ahead and assume that you put a lot of work into this, and we appreciate it, and we appreciate you coming here to just give us the very surface level information on what you've been working on. Best of luck at the conference, and we really hope to have you back to discuss more.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're going to go ahead and take a final break, and when we come back, we'll have our wrap-up, so stay tuned.